and I will just raise a few issues that I want to share with you on this topic. The first is, I have a confusion about the use of the word leadership. In the title of this seminar, in the previous session, how we use the word leadership, and in this current session, when we are using the word leadership, I have a confusion about that. And I feel what we are doing is we are collapsing the word leadership and merging it with authority. And the two are very different. So are we talking about women in positions of authority, or are we talking about women in positions of leadership? And I feel that is a distinction. It is not a hair-splitting distinction, it's an important distinction. It goes to the very heart of what do you mean by leadership. When Gandhiji protested against the discriminatory behavior that he encountered on a train and was thrown out, that was not a position of authority. To me, that was an act of leadership. When one of you decides to, when stopped by, suppose you jumped the red light, you decide not to pay a bribe and move on, continue driving, but you stop there and say that you will face the punishment or the challan, whatever happens. To me, that's an act of leadership. When as children you were playing on the street and everybody would take a small dog, everybody would throw pebbles at, one child would stand up and say that don't do this, that was an act of leadership. So I'm saying, first of all, let's figure out and decide what is the meaning of leadership, and are we talking about the lack of women in leadership roles and leadership acts, or are we talking about the lack of women in positions of authority? And I feel, to my mind, there is no dearth of women playing acts of leadership or roles of leadership. And it begins with the family itself, in the community, in the family, in society. Every day you look around you and you will see women playing out acts of leadership. So that's one point. And the other point is, somehow I feel that we are privileging this notion that if you do not climb up this hierarchy and reach these positions of authority, you are somehow lacking in fulfillment as a human being. And that's another point that I feel we should think about. Is the only fulfillment that is to be found in life is by reaching the top of the pile? And I'm not so sure about that. Just yesterday, incidentally, I was in Calcutta and I was speaking with a friend. She's a professor at IIM Calcutta, and she was saying that often she feels that her grandmother, who lived in a village, led a more fulfilling, satisfied, internally held together life than her own life is. And I'm not here again privileging the fact that women who stay at home are more fulfilled than the women who go out and take up a job or a normal traditional career. I'm not making that case at all. But what I am uncomfortable about, what has happened in the last 20-30 years of the women's liberation movement, that somehow we have ended up privileging one kind of roles, or when women take up roles that were otherwise held by men, then we say that that woman is arrived. But if a woman does something that traditionally a woman used to do, somehow we have tended to discount that and said that's not something to be appreciated. So being a good mother is not to be appreciated, being a good cook is not to be appreciated as much as getting onto the board of a company. And to me, I think preparing a good meal is as hard as preparing a good presentation. In fact, harder if you ask me. So that's the second point that I want to make, that I think the only aspiration for anyone, I'm saying for a man or a woman, if the aspiration is to rise in the hierarchy of authority and define fulfillment as human beings in that, I think that's something we should pause and think about, because there's no end. So having said those 2 points, that A, I think we are mixing authority with leadership and we need to distinguish between those two, and the second, that authority is not the only fulfillment in life. Let me then go back to, I think one point that Namrata made, that I'm more interested in how does any woman, any man find fulfillment, and how does society create a more level playing field in whatever is the chosen sphere? If I want to become a musician, is the playing field level? If I want to become a corporate honcho, is the playing field level? If I want to become a good housewife, is the playing field level? And there I feel, and why I was referring to what Namrata said, to also think about at all levels. Why does it matter whether women are there in board positions or not in board positions? Are women there in other levels or not? And are there enablers, unenablers? You need to think about all of those. And again, I would add this qualifier here. I'm saying think about making the playing field level for everyone. It is not only women who suffer because of these gender stereotypes. Believe me, men do too. Men also are captives of these stereotypes as much as women are, in different ways. In different ways, the stereotype, as a man, when I was studying in management in college, I know I chose to work in an NGO, and I know a lot of my male colleagues in that class said, Neelima, it's easy for you to make that decision to go and work in an NGO and get 1100 rupees per month as your salary. But I have parents to look after, I have their responsibility. If I don't take up a job, how on earth am I going to look after them? If I don't take up a proper job. I'm not saying there are not examples of men who have gone into the voluntary sector Vasi sitting here and looked after their family responsibilities, but I'm saying as a woman I have no responsibility at all other than look after myself. But most men who were studying with them, they would have got married if they didn't have a job which paid them well. I as a woman would have got married easily, where only on the basis of maybe how I looked or whatever. But I'm saying the playing field is not level for anyone in this gender stereotyping, but you need to make the playing field level. That I think is a point that the earlier speakers also made. And I feel in making the playing field level, and that's where I think both the earlier speakers touched on it. I feel today a lot of companies are talking about how to make the playing field level. And they may be doing it for reasons which I am not entirely always happy with, like Namrata said, because it leaves you with that doubt when you actually get that opportunity, that did you get it because of merit or did you get it because of diversity? And often I feel all this talk of diversity, a little bit it's become instrumental. Why should you have more women? Because women are more loyal employees, they're more conscientious, they're this, they're that. To me, that's instrumental. You are again, as Mr. Ramkumar was saying, you are loading on qualities, virtues onto a woman that the woman may not want. I don't want to be conscientious, I don't want to be loyal, I want to be as disloyal as my male colleagues are. They change jobs every 2 years, why should I not change jobs every 2 years? They bitch, why should I not bitch? They do politics, why should I not do politics? I'm saying, only saying this, that in companies, sometimes I think it appears that, are you talking about getting women because of instrumental reasons? If that's the reason, do a double take. But still, having said that, whether because of instrumental reasons or because of genuine reasons of having realized that they've lost out on women and they need to get them in, with companies within their boundaries are doing a lot to make things more welcoming for women. I can give you've heard a lot of examples from Lupin, from Mahindra. I can give you more examples of Coca-Cola, but that's not the point. I feel you need to, if you want to think about playing fields which are more level and equal, you need to think beyond corporate boundaries. And I think a little bit my colleagues on the panel alluded to it. Do you know, in the last 20 years, and that is from where the discrimination begins, in the last 20 years, the sex ratio at birth has been constantly dropping. There are now fewer number of girls who are born. The 0 to 6 year sex ratio is becoming worse in every census. And the discrimination begins from there, from the time when you do not want a girl to be born in your family. The discrimination begins from there. Namrata already talked to you about, if you look at schooling, if you look at higher education, forget about all those rites of, you come to simple rites of passage. which for all of us go through those rites of passage. For example, you get married, you have children, you do this, that. Namrata mentioned about workforce participation rates. If you were to look at workforce participation rates over years, over ages, so if you begin to map workforce participation across men and women from, let's say, 20, 25 years onwards till 60 years, you do that mapping, and you also do a mapping within that of what happens to married men and what happens to married women. And the sharpest drop in the workforce participation happens at the time when women get married. The workforce participation drops. For men, it moves in the opposite direction. When they get married, the workforce participation increases. So it's a simple rite of passage. Men get married, women get married, but it affects both of them very differently. Women going through that rite of passage drop out. It's no longer a level playing field. And I'm not saying women who have chosen, a lot of women choose, a lot of my friends have chosen to stay at home and work or not work and look after family. I think that's, if it's a choice that is made consciously, perfect. But if it is a choice that is made because you are out of choice, then it is not so bad. So also if you were to look at what happens when women give birth to children, then also they drop out. So that's what happens within the family. But you leave family, you look at women who will choose to then want to, or stay within the family for a bit. And why I like the Carmen film so much, I know some of the examples you may say, chocolate chip cookie wasn't really the answer. You can say that. But I think the point that that film was making, a lot of women are not able to get involved in formal workspaces. Informal work, women do a lot. But in formal workspaces, a lot of times women can't do that because they have to fetch water. A simple thing like having to fetch water for the family, which takes up 3 hours of their time. The tanker arrives at erratic points of time, or you have to walk miles to fetch the water, means that they cannot take up a formal job. Fuel wood fetching, what you take for granted that you could just click the lighter and switch on the knob and the gas will come on. For a lot of women, just that is an existential issue to be resolved because of which they cannot take a formal job. And if women will also want to choose out of the family, if you look at urban design questions at this point of time, our cities are unsafe. A lot of women, for them, I know of so many women who have dropped out because they felt that the commute was unsafe. If they had to go through metros, if they had to go through buses, and you've all heard stories about Delhi lighting in our urban spaces, good transportation in our urban spaces. So I'm saying there are all of these ever-expanding circles where the playing field becomes uneven, that you have to think about if you truly want to think about creating a level playing field for women. So you have to think about not just what happens within corporates, you have to think of what happens within families, you have to think of what happens within societies, you have to think about how do you design cities, how do you design workspaces, and of course finally you have to then also think about mindsets, about men, and I'm not blaming anyone, but it is true that at least in corporate settings, men do mind if their boss is a woman. Less so in non-corporate settings. In not-for-profit world, men mind lesser if their boss is a woman. And that's probably because in any case, those organizations begin thinking about many of these things from fundamentals and begin to think about designing organizations that are more equal and break stereotypes. Whereas the corporate spaces are still greatly influenced by stereotypes, and therefore for them to accept women. So mindsets is of course then the other thing that you have to grapple with. But maybe that's where I will stop.